Joining us is a gentleman who I think is the second time here on The Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to Fyzabad MP, Dr. Lackram Bodoe. Pleasant good evening, sir, and welcome.
Hi, good evening, Mikee K. Good evening to your listeners on The Observer.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here again with you.
Thank you so much for taking time. Can we hear you clearly? Test one more time. Good evening.
Good evening, good evening. Are you hearing me?
All right, you were sounding a bit soft there for a minute, so as long as I can hear you, that's good. Hope all is well. I know there's some issues as well as crime affecting so many areas, and Fyzabad is not immune to that. But before we get to that, I want to deal with something that, you know, we went through the pandemic. So much was spoken about the medical care, the practitioners, the nurses, everyone. And yet still there's so many complaints coming from the medical fraternity. No salary increase, still working on 2013 salary and long hours, poor working conditions, no allowance for the same period of time, no security for female doctors when of course they work late at night to get to their vehicles. I mean, what is really happening here? I know that MPAT would be, of course, the body representing medical practitioners, but when can this be straightened out, and why is it taking place?
So I just want to put this whole issue in perspective, Mikey, and let's look at the bigger picture. Now, I mean, the whole performance of the health sector, which means that the care that is administered to the public, really depends on several factors. So at the planning level, the policies and programs of the government. But at the delivery level, you have what I call the PPs. You have the plans, which means the institutions which you have to maintain, that's another story. And then, of course, you have the people, which means the staff, and you have the processes. So we are focusing on the second thing, which is the people. And, of course, we all know that doctors and nurses form the backbone of the health sector. And you're quite right, during the pandemic, all of our lives depended on the care administered by the hardworking nurses and the doctors. But the unfortunate reality is that the doctors are still working on the 2015 salaries, because the last time the salaries and terms and conditions were negotiated would have been in 2015. So from that time up to the last 9 years, there have been no further settlement between the government and the doctors. I can speak to this from a more personal point, because the SWREC would have been the regional health authority, the regional body, which would have been assigned by the government to negotiate with them first. And I can tell you that when the partnership government limited office in 2015, that negotiation was settled. But it remains an issue, and it is really unfortunate and unfair to ask doctors to continue to work under those salaries and those terms and conditions. I believe that negotiations are taking place. From my conversation with the head of MPAT, of course, I'm not at liberty to go into the details.
I understand. But let me interject here. But take in consideration that these individuals came in for high praise for how they handle and manage the pandemic. We were told to come out, to gather, to give them a round of applause and what have you. But at the end of it all, I mean, it's a fact that you have doctors who are unemployed, and some even on short-term contracts. I mean, how much of this that we're seeing here and is playing out has to do with politics rather than appreciating the people who come out there to do their jobs?
Well, again, you're hitting the nail on the head, because you're quite right. The Minister of Health and the head of the government came out and praised the non-citizens and the doctors and nurses. But there's a bigger issue here. Now, it was promised to those doctors who would have put their lives on the line literally during the pandemic to go out and work. Remember, not everybody would have wanted to work during that time. But there were several doctors who came out and worked, and they were promised. And in fact, I must go back to this Simondal report, which recommended that some sort of arrangement be made for those doctors, especially the ones who worked during the pandemic. But the government is yet to provide any sort of sustainable employment to these doctors. But you hit the nail on the head again, my teachers. When you talk about short-term contracts, Now, keep in mind that the state is investing a considerable amount of money in subsidizing the fees and so on to train doctors. So we are training doctors at our universities, both at Mount Hope and elsewhere in the Caribbean. That's considerable cost to the taxpayer. And yet we have these doctors, many of them unemployed. I'm informed, again, that some of the vacancies are being filled, but they're being filled very slowly. And this is really an issue to be addressed. Short-term contract
I don't know, we're losing you there for a bit.
Is this better, Mikey?
Oh, a lot better. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. All right. So I was saying that in terms of the training implications for doctors, it is important that doctors have, even if you are giving them contract employment, it cannot be a 2-week, a 1-month locum. That is of no value to the training of the doctors, and eventually patients will suffer from this. So for the health system to become sustainable and and beneficial to patients, there has to be better arrangements in place. You cannot continue to give doctors short-term employment in terms of 1 month and 2 month and 3 month locums and so on. That is not the norm. That is not the practice, and that is not how it should be. And of course, we go back to the issue, of offering those doctors who worked during the pandemic some sort of sustainable employment. That is yet to happen. There is another issue, Mikey. Now, you have, at the RHA level, there are a certain category of doctors have the option of being offered permanent employment. These are the specialist medical officers, the so-called consultants, and those at the registrar level, and indeed those who are house officers as well, who choose to take up permanent employment. But I'm also informed that the process for this is not clear and transparent. Apparently, the selection of those for permanent employment sometimes, doesn't appear to be a transparent process. And you spoke about politics, and one wonders whether there is politics at play here. But I'll have more to say about this as the information.
I know you may not want to basically thread along those lines, but I can say it. You simply just have to give me some clarity, and especially people who are locked on. But the reason why I asked about the politics is because even when you go and you check the ongoing wage negotiations for doctors expected to adjourn, would have been earlier this year, like July, I think, sometime in July. And yet still there's no further information coming out of that. All we're hearing is that it's at a very sensitive stage. I think the whole issue of politics came up because any information coming out of the current wage negotiations for doctors, there's not much information coming out due to the sensitivity of the negotiations. Are we seeing things playing out where during the heights of the pandemic, there were some doctors who were for and some who were against the way things were being managed? Are those doctors who stood up and said that's not the way it should be done, are they now being penalized?
Well, I don't want to say anything definite on that. I would hate to think that is the case. I would like to believe that in the area of healthcare, when you're dealing with professionals, that any government, would treat professionals based on merit. So I would hate to think that is the case, and I would want to leave it. I would want to leave it at that for the time being.
Oh, on the issue of medical fraud, I mean, here it is, you have doctors, and I mean, you just confirmed there are those who are unemployed, those who are getting short contracts, but then you have doctors, and this was an issue that was raised sometime in the middle of this year, when it was Venezuelan migrants are performing duties, medical duties here as medical practitioners without the necessary clearance from the council and the authorities. Has this been something that has been nipped in the bud?
Well, I believe from my own discussions with members of the medical council that matter is being taken very seriously. And I believe that all steps, I'm reliably informed that all steps are being taken to protect the public. Of course, the role of the medical council, of the medical board, is to ensure that the public is protected from this sort of fraudulent practice. But by and large, I believe that might be a minority. But of course, even one practitioner who is not qualified is one too many. But I'm given the assurance that that issue has been dealt with, at that level.
And although negotiations, of course, are ongoing, there would be issues that stand out most of all. And one of the things I mentioned was security for female doctors. I mean, we know the crime situation in the country. They're working long hours. When they do come out, of course, from the institution, medical institutions, there's no one there to escort them to their vehicles. And there has been reports of an uptick in crime, especially in parking lots and what have you. Has this been something at the front at least addressed while negotiations are taking place?
Well, it's a big issue, and I want to extend it further, Mikey. It is not only an issue for female doctors, but I believe it's an issue for all doctors and perhaps all staff. Keep in mind that nurses as well, do onerous shifts and so on. So the whole issue of security is something that I believe needs to be strengthened at the level of the hospitals. I mean, we had that frightening scenario just a few months ago of the Port of Spain hospital, where criminals were able to come into the casualty itself and finish, whatever they were attempting to do outside of the hospital. So I think the security at all of our nation's health institutions need to be reviewed and revamped. And of course, for those who are working and coming off shift at long hours, the car parks especially need to be properly lit. And security needs to be beefed up. In my time as at the head of the SWRHA, we also had the internal security, the in-house security, and their job, of course, was to ensure, that doctors and nurses, were safe when they came to work or they left the job, at those hours. So I honestly feel that a lot more could be done with regards to protecting the doctors and nurses. And of course, the female doctors. But now all of us, everybody's at risk, Mikey. So I have to extend it to protect.
I understand clearly. You're right. The times have changed, of course. And the issue of long hours. I mean, how are medical practitioners able to perform if it is that they're out there for all of these hours? I mean, here it is. We know that there are doctors that quote short-term contracts. Those that are unemployed. Can't we get them on board to help these doctors who have to work these long hours?
Well, as time has progressed, I must say that the conditions would have improved a bit from when I started to practice in the public sector some 40 years ago to what obtains now. So in terms of the junior doctors in the hospitals, the hours are regulated and so on. But I think one of the issues where we could do better is in the primary care sector, where you don't have enough doctors to see the patients. And these are the clinics and so on, where we deal with the diabetes and the high blood pressure, what we call the NCDs. And I think some of the doctors who are unemployed could be employed and allocated to make the job of the doctors in the health sector, so they can spend more time. You'll have more doctors, they can spend more time with patients, and that problem can be addressed in that way.
I agree with you. And again, I hope it's not a situation where some people are just being picked out and being marginalized because they didn't follow whatever directions or as the case may be. But again, poor working conditions. I mean, do doctors have space where they can go to rest and what have you? Are the facilities equipped or up to standard where these working conditions are suitable?
Well, what I can say, I can speak again about the San Fernando Teaching Hospital. For a long time, we had the old San Fernando General Hospital, which was commissioned back in 1954, 55, thereabouts. At that time, there was a doctor's lounge, which really was, a sort of rundown facility. But in the construction of the San Fernando Teaching Hospital, a conscious and deliberate effort was made to provide proper quarters for doctors, those who are on call and who are required to be resident in the hospital whilst on call. I'm not sure about the status of this accommodation as we speak, but I hope that would have been maintained. And I say that in light of the fact that I have reliable information which has come to me saying that the whole issue of maintenance of that new teaching hospital at San Fernando is an issue in terms of even infrastructure, the lifts, the toilets, and so on. Someone has pointed out to me that two of the panels fell off the wall and so on. So there are a lot of issues, of course, and that will all come back. to dictate the conditions under which the doctors have to work.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trusting and hoping that the new hospitals which were constructed at Point Fortin and Arima, and the one that is being constructed at Sandy Grande, which is being commissioned at Sandy Grande, will have proper facilities for doctors.
Yeah, because
But before I leave that, I can tell you for sure that at the Mount Hope Women's Hospital, where doctors, that is where pregnant women and so on are taken care of, and doctors have to be resident on call. I'm told that the facilities for doctors there really is in a poor state. So that is something that needs to be looked into urgently by those in charge of the NCRHA, because that hospital will fall under the North Central Regional Health Authority.
Yeah, and I really hope that we can get that message across, because I know that many doctors and many, of course, nurses and what have you working in these conditions are not going to be the best people to perhaps interact with patients at all times. And they need to get these things done. I mean, I don't think they are high-hanging fruits. They are things that can be done immediately to basically put things back in. But again, it seems that politics is raising its head and so forth. Now, when issues come about, because you did raise an issue during the budget debate about the blood products at the San Fernando General Hospital that was affected by outage at a lab, what's the update on that?
Well, I believe that steps are being taken to correct that problem. But you see, it speaks to a greater problem, and one that is pervasive under this current government in terms of, the lack of what I call preventative maintenance. Now, some of these, for example, the generators and so on that came into question and broke down in this particular problem would have been things that required maintenance over a period of time. And for some reason, the RHA seems to find money to do other things as opposed to what is important. I just want to give an example. So, for example, you would have full page ads, and the public needs to take note of this because this is taxpayers' dollars being spent. There are full page ads quite often, especially by the NCRHA, saying that they've done so and so. So they're spending money to publish on the papers what they're being paid to do, what is their job. So I'm saying that some of that money could be spent elsewhere. So it's a question of priority that needs to be looked at. And maintenance, we spoke about the 3 Ps, and we said that the plant, which includes the infrastructure, of course, is a very critical aspect, for the people, which is the doctors and nurses and other healthcare staff to be able to work in.
And what about the calls for amendments to the Medical Board Act?
In terms of
well, I know the doctors have been calling on these changes to take place and to implement many new things, and hopefully that can take place sometime in the near future.
Yeah, well, I think there's an ongoing. Yeah, I recall that discussion. So there's an ongoing debate where the Medical Board of Trinidad and Tobago is taking its responsibility of protecting that the doctors who are granted license to practice, remain qualified, remain up to date with their knowledge and so on. So there's something called CPD, which is continuous medical professional development, and I think the board is taking steps to ensure that the doctors do certain things in terms of refresher courses and so on. So I think that's a step in the right direction. It's new to our medical culture. It's well known abroad in the UK and the USA and so on, and I think that it's something that is coming on board. There's also the issue of certifying who are the specialists and what they're qualified to do and so on. And I think that is being dealt with.
Let me ask you, do you believe that this administration shares that vision to implement many of these programs that could, of course, ease a lot of the stress on the doctors and bring about a more efficient service? Yeah, well,
the thing about it is that the Medical Board of Trinidad and Tobago, created by an act of parliament, is supposed to be an independent body. We don't want to go into the discussion of how independent bodies are now being treated in Trinidad and Tobago. That's a whole new discussion there.
Yeah.
But so far, I have to say that the medical board has been able to maintain, to a large extent, its autonomy in terms of making some of these decisions, and I trust that that will continue, under this current regime.
Let me ask you, your constituency, based on your report that came, your press release, businesses in Fyzabad are currently facing difficult economic times and an upsurge in criminal activity. And this comes, of course, on the heels of the murder of a Syrian businessman, Muath Nassar, early yesterday morning while conducting sales in his food outlet in Fyzabad. I believe he was one of these gyro vendors. And give us an idea, because we're hearing it from all over, not just in the East-West corridor, but the issue of extortion, the issue of people having to change and make alterations to their times when they close up shop and what have you. Give us an idea. And again, this has been happening quite some time over across the country.
Yeah, well, I first of all, I just want to use this opportunity to express my condolences to the family of Mr. Nassar. Although Mr. Nassar was not a resident or constituent of Fyzabad, he has in fact been conducting business in Fyzabad in the community for the past 4 years. So what happened was very unfortunate, of him being murdered. Luckily, his son, who was there with him, tending to the business, his life was spared. I spoke with the owner of the property, because it was Mr. Nassar had rented the property to do his business. And he indicated that just a few months ago, this very business, the customers were of the business. And of course, we've had a few other murders in Fyzabad, during the past few months and so on. Now, the problem here, of course, is that when these things happen, it means that business is impacted. It means that, customers are afraid to come out because of the safety issues. And, business is very important in Fyzabad. Mikey, when Petrotrin was shut down in 2018, a lot of the economic activity that, that revolved around the operation of Petrotrin and so on, brought business and income and, economic stability to Fyzabad. So since 2018, that has been a major issue. And of course, any factor that affects the business community is a big problem. And crime, of course, is one of the issues. In fact, just on Saturday evening, I had the privilege of attending the Fyzabad Chamber of Commerce Christmas event, and one of the fears expressed by the executive of that business chamber was the impact of crime on business in Fyzabad. And that was the weekend. That was just a couple of days before this incident took place. So yes, it is a major issue, and the issue really has to do with the resourcing of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in Fyzabad. I mean, as we speak, there's an issue with resources. The Fyzabad police station is in a state of disrepair and really needs, a proper facelift. And at the best of times, there's one vehicle available. So the patrols that need to be done on a more frequent basis, are not being done. And really due to no fault of the officers, who are, by and large, very, very hardworking at that.
And give us the issue. I know recently there was some flooding there that affected many of the residents. How is that? How are you coping with that?
So thankfully, this flooding was not as bad as it was in 2018, 2019. But we did have, on Saturday, I would have had to visit about 100 or so residents who were affected in various parts of the constituency. But the problem is that once there's flooding in the Pinal, Debe, and La Fortune area, that flood water has to come down to drain into the Gulf of Paria, right to the cremation site where that river comes into the Gulf of Paria. So there's always the risk of flooding. Again, over the years, I would have reached out to the authorities in terms of creating what we call detention ponds to slow down the water coming to the Gulf. But of course, nothing has been done in this regard. But thankfully, the destruction to property was not as great. Some residents still, of course, lose some property and so on. But because they've learned to expect this problem now, they would have taken some precautions. So we are grateful and thankful for that on this occasion.
I know things are not easy. Any closing comments? Go right ahead.
Well, I just want to say that has become very difficult for the constituents of Fyzabad. In fact, it has become very difficult for all of us. In Trinidad and Tobago, I think the pervasive is the crime. I mean, there's, of course, in the health sector, which I shadow as opposition member of parliament, there are many, many issues that we would not have had the time to go into this evening. And, you know, at the end of 9 years of this current government, Mikey, I am of the opinion that it's going to be very difficult for this current government to turn things around. I mean, having not been able to do that in the past 9 years. So, I mean, I'm sure I share the opinion and views of, you know, a great number of people in this population who think that, you know, that the hope for 2025, you know, to take us out of this, you know, would be some new form of governance on the horizon. And of course, I speak here now as a UNC member of parliament, you know, and I just want to state to the population that, you know, we are able, willing, you know, and prepared, you know, to bring Trinidad back to where it rightfully belongs.
All right. I want to thank you so much for taking time out this evening and shedding some light on the issues. Again, best of luck to you and your entire team, and we'll be speaking to you, of course, sometime in the near future. Thank you so much, Dr. Bodoe.
Thank you very much.